move on it, but then the moderates did pass something, but it gutted all those fees to help offset some of the losses. And so it's really not, we're not seeing the shot of adrenaline because everybody else messed it up.
I like Senator Donovan, I really do. He's a nice guy, but I think this is just absolutely ridiculous to try to blame this on. I mean, that's masterful, actually, from a political standpoint, to try to blame this on Democrats and moderates who are opposed to this from the very outset. And I'll get back, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, Governor Brownback signed it. He signed it. He didn't
He
have
campaigned on it.
Yeah.
I think Senator Donovan
It's not his fault.
picked up my language from being on the show a couple weeks ago when I called it a terrible bill. He's now calling it a terrible bill. But it's amazing how the blame game has gone on. First, Brownback claims it. It's his bill. He campaigns on it. And then earlier in the session, when the wheels hit the road, well, it's the legislature's fault, and now Donovan says it's obviously the Democrats and the moderates' fault. This is very creative. I don't know what else to call it.
That's great. Well, Richard and I will say this. 2 years ago on this show, we sat here, several of us talking, and we said, okay, now the ball is firmly in the Republicans' court. They've got everything they want. They've got this set up exactly the way they want this set up. Governor Brownback has exactly what he asked for, so if it works, they can take all the credit, but if it doesn't work, they also take all of the blame.
That is correct, and you can see that shortfall was coming from a long time ago. And we've had rescissions before. We're a balanced budget state. We can't spend more than we bring in. And so normally there would have been a cut back in November, December, seeing that large of a shortfall. But it was held off for a couple more months. And that puts everyone in a bind when you have to take back at the 11th hour on budgets. It put all the state agencies and universities as well into a bind as well. And you have to wonder if we have legislators who are good at their farm or whatever business they're at and planning ahead, then shouldn't the government be able to be run responsibly as well? And in this case, this is the first fiasco we've had with a rescission this late.
Well, Richard, you'd think that would be accurate, but we're a state that has proven again and again, even when we do have a surplus, we don't save it. We spend it or we give it back to the taxpayers. And I understand the logic there, but it's great for campaigning.
I want to question that, Tim, a little bit.
Well, I'm saying it's great for campaigning.
I worked for two governors who did save it, who built up balances and got defeated when they ran for re-election just because of that, because they didn't give it away or they didn't spend it. They put it in the balances and they were criticized very strongly for it.
And that's the sad truth of politics today.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the Republicans really are in a challenging position here because they've driven out most of the Democrats. There's a handful. It's an endangered species up in Topeka. They've driven out most of the moderates, again, just a few. So it's primarily the pretty conservative Republicans and Governor Brownback. Again, he's got his starting lineup that he wanted on his team. Oh, yeah. The problem with that is, and here's the challenge I think they're facing, and this kind of echoes what you were saying about Senator Donovan, when you get to that point and you've got all the dominoes on your side or all the cards in your hand, it's really hard to blame somebody if it doesn't work. If what you proposed and your plan isn't working the way you want it to work, who do you point the finger at? And politics is great about pointing fingers.
It is, and this is probably taking it a little too far, but you think of the French Revolution where they were always having to find someone to blame and behead. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Topeka if things keep going the way they've been going. But the whole point of me bringing up Senator Donovan's point was that now they're talking about instituting some of those fees because I guess they're taking too much heat. I don't know about cuts, moving things from the highway fund or whatever they're looking at. They are now talking about bringing back some of those fees, putting in some of those fee increases to try to offset. It must be pretty clear to somebody that we're going to have to do something fairly serious, and if we're not going to stop the further tax reductions, how are we going to do this if it's not going to starve the beast and take it as far as some people are afraid might go?
Well,
Whatever they do, they're going to set a track record here that is going to make them vulnerable when the next election comes around. They are going to be raising taxes in some way. They're going to be doing some spending cuts. They're certainly shifting the burden onto children and grandchildren by carving out money from the highway fund, carving out pensions money, and essentially rolling up debt on future generations. And that's really the bottom line of what's going on.
But Ed, this to me seems like, and I said this last week and probably the week before as well, I'm sounding like a broken record, but it seems like a big shell game to me, because we have the governor and the legislature cutting taxes in one area. Then we have the governor proposing increasing taxes in a different area. When the governor was elected, if you remember correctly, we had that 1 cent sales tax that was supposed to sunset that Governor Parkinson put into effect to try to dig us out of the hole. Governor Brownback wanted to keep that, or at least a portion of it, and did. So how can you claim to be, coming in and cutting taxes when over here you're raising taxes on basically a different class of people, because a lot of these are regressive taxes, quite frankly, and that's just a fact. I don't think anybody can really argue that.
Well, you can, but it'd take longer than our show.
Rodney would argue that.
But those same people, problematically, are also the same people that generally don't vote as much.
Yeah.
I mean, people in the lower portions of the socioeconomic strata just aren't as politically engaged and motivated as others are. So, Ed, I'd like to agree with you and think that there might be some electoral repercussions in the future, but I'm not so sure.
Well, look at the last election.
Right.
I mean, Governor Brownback was extremely vulnerable.
Right.
He won.
Yeah, and essentially it always comes down to the district and who the candidates are, and if Democrats can't field candidates or a moderate Republican can't get any traction in a primary, then the status quo is going to remain unchanged.
And the moderates, they last 2 election cycles here in the state of Kansas, they really took it on the chin and were basically run out of town.
Right.
So I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know what the next step is. And Richard, of course, we have education funding in the middle of all of this.
Big,
the 800-pound gorilla in the corner of the room. That we still haven't decided what we're going to do with that.
Even though the courts have said this is what you have to do, I'm not sure the legislature feels it needs to follow the court. In fact, they fall back and say, maybe we can change the funding. And perhaps what is adequate funding may only be for a portion of what the school classroom is doing. And that can be extremely worrisome. But the dysfunction is not just in Kansas, it's also nationwide with the gridlock that we have in Washington. And so I don't have to go back to the French Revolution. We can go back just to George Kennan throughout the 50s and so on, the architect of keeping the Cold War cold. And he said, in the end, democracy does have a few flaws, and one of them is that people who run for election have to sometimes not do the right thing, but have to do what will get them reelected, which may not be the right thing. And we may be seeing a case where the communication allows people to keep good legislators from being reelected.
Yeah, that gets back to your point about a couple of governors who kept some money in the bank, and look how it worked out for them.
That does happen.
Yeah, sadly enough. Okay, we need to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the new gun bill here in the state of Kansas. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
$1? $2? $3? How much will you pay when you join the YMCA? With so many member benefits, the YMCA is always a great value. And through March 15th, you choose the joiner fee you pay by choosing the date you join. Join March 1st and your joiner fee is only $1. Join the 3rd and it's only $3. The earlier you join, the less you pay. Membership includes unlimited use at all 8 Greater Wichita YMCAs. What are you waiting for? Pay the day and change your life today.
The Blarney Breakfast, Wichita's favorite St. Patrick's Day tradition, turns 40 Tuesday, March 17th at Old Chicago East. Enjoy a great breakfast and help build a pot of gold for the children of Rainbows United. It's $12 for adults and $5 for the wee kids. Proceeds help special needs children and their families served through Rainbows United. Cakeland cares with the 40th annual Blarney Breakfast. Please join us along with our partners in helping Kansas kids.
For busy Kansas families, the weekend means go time. But this weekend, winter weather might throw you off track. The Cake First Alert team will be tracking the storm, alerting you to developments, and protecting your family with the news you need when you need it most.
This weekend, trust Cake First Alert to keep you ahead of the storm. On air with Cake News, online at cakelandweather.com, and on your mobile with breaking weather text alerts. Cake First Alert, always tracking, always alerting, always protecting. Educated voters make informed decisions. That's why Cakeland Votes is tracking the Wichita mayoral race for you. With the latest news, meet the candidate video profiles and live streams of mayoral forums. Get informed. Go to cakelandvotes.com.
Ryan Phillippe.
If you think I did it, arrest me.
Juliette Lewis.
That's what I'm gonna find out.
I didn't kill him. Secrets and Lies, tonight, 9/8 Central on ABC.
And welcome back. A pretty revolutionary gun bill. A lot of people call it constitutional carry. Looks like it's got a pretty good chance of passing here in the state of Kansas. Kansas isn't the only state that's done this. There are a few others that have. In a nutshell, basically what it is if you can legally own a gun, you can carry it concealed. You don't have to have a permit, so you don't have to do the training or take the test or get the certificate. And you know, this is one that the gun rights folks say you can already open carry without a permit, so why not conceal carry? And of course, the people on the other side would say, well, it sure would help to have some training and make sure that people know how to handle those guns that they're carrying in concealed fashion.
Right. There's 4 states, and now I'm going to blank: Arizona, Wyoming, Alaska, and Montana. I think it is, but it has to be outside of the
city limits.
Yeah. I guess I don't get it. I mean, my response to someone saying, well, you can already carry open, why not allow just everybody to carry concealed? If I'm walking into Dillon's or wherever and I see somebody carrying a firearm on their hip out in the open, I'm going to avoid them. I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment. I hunt, I own guns, a lot of them. I mean, to feel the need like you need to just carry something walking around exposed like that, I don't get it. And so I think a lot of people can see that and go, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna stay over here. And a big selling point when we debated the concept of even having concealed handgun licenses in Kansas back, 10 years ago or so, the argument that ruled the day was they gotta go through training. And not just everyone's gonna do this. And now obviously I just don't get it. And when you have NRA instructors saying that this is problematic, it's better to keep it like it is, because at least you know that if people are carrying concealed legally, they've got a little bit of training behind that. If we're not broke, why are we going in search of solution that's not needed? Well,
and this is one of those, Rodney, and gentlemen, you can jump in on this one too. As I'm a former gun owner myself, I don't own one currently, and I have owned firearms in the past, including handguns. I think, but I've been taking training on these firearms ever since I was a child. And I think one of the things that people don't understand if you've never owned one or fired a firearm is how difficult it is and how potentially dangerous it can be. And I think a lot of people watch TV and movies and they think, oh, you see the gunfights and people able to hit their target a half-mile away with a handgun while they're running and stuff. And real life isn't that way. And that's what concerns me is maybe an innocent but well-meaning person hurts themselves or hurts somebody else. I do think training is vital. Richard?
Right.
Yes. Also, as a person who has a family member who is in police, I am concerned there as well, because from their perspective, when they show up on a scene and there has been violence, the concern is the people with the guns how do you tell the good guy from the bad guy? And we do have the hyped society, the hyped media, where we see it being used casually, used unrealistically, as you've mentioned. But the truth is that in the dangers out there that are propelling people to want to carry all of this are extremely hyped. There are many policemen that go through all of their career and retire and have never fired their gun once, aside from practice. And so what is driving this, when you go overseas, anywhere else except America, and they look back and they see the gun violence that occurs here, they wonder why we're doing things like this.
Ed?
I remember being in Phoenix quite a while ago and in a restaurant, and a couple folks came in with 6-shooter on their hip, and I was just shocked. I was shocked by that. I had never seen that before, and I think it's way overboard. I mean, I grew up around guns, not handguns, but games. Gaming guns, and yet I don't want to carry it into a restaurant or a bar. I mean, I guess I could. I can carry I got a beautiful shotgun my dad handed down to me, and I guess I could just prop it up next to me and kind of show it off. It does seem just kind of a crazy, interest group driven idea, and not much thought being given.
Yeah, I guess, kind of the thought process that goes through my head initially is people are humans and we make mistakes, and, you drop things, you bump things. I mean, I'm not the most graceful person in the world. I drop my cell phone on occasion. It falls out of my pocket sometimes. So I guess, just things like that. And I know I'll get 1,000 emails from gun owners and gun rights folks who will say that, they're secured, but they aren't always. I mean, there are incidents that happen, and you feel for those people. And I guess that's the danger, that if you're deciding you're going to carry and you hurt yourself, that's one thing. If you hurt somebody else, it's a different situation, and that's my concern.
Having gone through the training personally, one of the first things they teach you is about the lethality, and reinforce constantly, this is deadly force you're invoking, and the legal repercussions and possible repercussions if you decide to draw your firearm. And if you draw your firearm, you should expect to pull the trigger. I mean, this is not something to be taken lightly. And again, I'm a fan of concealed firearms, but with training and getting a license. I think this is, surely there are ideologues out there who think this is needed, but at the end of the day, politically, what this is going to do for people is it's going to be a palm card, it's going to be a TV commercial. In 2 years, it's not just the House that's up, it's the state Senate that's up. And so I think this is a way for the NRA and other gun lobbies to be able to find some ammunition, no pun intended, to come at who they think are enemies of the Second Amendment.
And this thing will pass.
Yeah, but the Senate passed it today with 31 votes.
Yeah. This is going to become law in the state of Kansas. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't know if you guys have another theory on that, but I think this will happen. Yeah. All right, let's take another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk education, Common Core, AP classes, and inappropriate material. Separate subjects, but we'll talk about them all in the same segment.
Join Menards in saluting American-made products with Menards Made in the USA sale. Protect your vehicle with Peak Global Lifetime Antifreeze and Coolant. Made in Bedford Park, Illinois, it works for all makes and models. Right now, a gallon is just $4.99 after rebate. Exide is a leading manufacturer of many types of batteries. Right now, all stock Exide automotive batteries are on sale. This 40-month warranty auto battery is just $74.99 after exchange.
Save big money at Menards.
I love this show.
Yeah, we just started it. It's good.
Especially when it's
No. We just started watching. Pause it. Okay, play it.
Cox is now the official sponsor of Binge Watching. Now binge on the best of HBO, now with access to over 2,000 of the most bingeable shows. Get a bundle for just $99.99 a month.
Hey, how does it end? Did they escape?
No. Do not tell him.
Okay, gotta get back to the show.
Cake News, tracking the big stories.
A former student accused of showing up to Goddard High School
had a semi-automatic handgun.
It's about as serious as it gets.
Alerting you to breaking news and weather.
More than enough of the white stuff to cause traffic troubles.
There is a traffic crackdown. Officers are making sure people wear seatbelts around high schools.
Protecting you and your family.
We're going to have sub-zero wind chills. Heavy coats needed this morning.
Always tracking, always alerting, always protecting. Cake News.
Tonight.
It's terribly shocking. What happened?
What's going on here? They think you had something to do with it.
A little boy that we loved is dead, and I'm a suspect in his murder.
Is it true? Dad, is it?
Ryan Phillippe.
If you think I did it, arrest me.
Juliette Lewis.
That's what I'm gonna find out.
I didn't kill him! Secrets and Lies premieres tonight, 9/8 Central on ABC.
And welcome back. Just had an email this week, in fact, from an educator wanting us to do more stories on education and bills affecting education happening here in the state of Kansas. We've got a couple that we're going to talk about this morning. One of those is Common Core, the potential repeal of Common Core, what that's going to do to AP, IB classes, and also kind of the assault on AP that we've seen. We saw it just south of the border. It looks like it may happen here in the state of Kansas because it's teaching, I'm quoting, too negative of a viewpoint of United States history.
Right.
Well, history's not always pretty.
I'm going to let Richard start on this one. He's the expert. I have some thoughts.
Oh, that's okay.
Go for it, Richard.
Oh, but the bill goes way beyond history. It is really bringing back and stripping out virtually all use of any outside of Kansas curricular materials after 2010. As a result, this would mean we would no longer go for the waiver, and I don't know if they realize that means a loss of $170 million at least in federal funding.
Thank goodness we have lots of extra money in the budget.
Oh, there's a ton of things in here. The AP classes, all of it, dual credit courses. It says that schools and local districts are to take back control of the curriculum. And AP is used, the core curriculum is actually just in the language arts and in math for right now. But we have AP that is being taught to, and that's a national program, and so therefore they're including it in there as well. International Baccalaureate, which is actually European in origin and is used in many international schools. All of these external sources, you wouldn't be able to use their curriculum anymore. It would have to be a locally decided curriculum to be used in classrooms. The one about AP history, which of course is south of the border, has been a big issue, is because it isn't as prescriptive about reading the Constitution and so forth, but has lots of activities in it where the students are supposed to go and look up and come back and discuss and debate these things. But since they're not spelled out there, then they don't see those. They see those as being missing, and they believe that it portrays America in a light that is not black and white anymore, that there are shades of gray, that World War II started with Pearl Harbor, and there wasn't anything that happened before then that made the Japanese unhappy, and so forth. And the new AP curriculum looks at things like that. So that's as part of it, but it's a very small part of Senate Bill 56, which is really a massive one that goes through. Not 56, got the wrong one here. Yes, here we go.
67.
67, okay. I say, where's my yellow marks here? But man, it is all through here that the state will retain all curricular control, strictly here. This is something that Nebraska had wanted to do back under No Child Left Behind, and would have been the first state to actually have opted out, and they would have given up their $70 million to do so. But they were informed this was still under Margaret Spellings, under President Bush, that there might be some other funds they might lose as well. And they gave up.
I think this attempt at lawmakers to determine curriculum justifies why we have school boards, and they're in the Constitution, local school boards, and a state school board that is charged with curriculum development. And hopefully this won't go anywhere. I do want to comment. I have two granddaughters who, in the Wichita school system, who have been exposed to the Common Core curriculum, and I continue to be awestruck at what they are learning and what they are doing in class. It is amazing. To compare it to what I went through 50 years ago, it just is astounding, their grasp of things like the Voting Rights Act, which we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of here shortly, and various historical protests and boycotts. And I guess that's, some people would say a boycott is a negative. That's actually how we get things done, often politically, or protests.
Rodney?
The Common Core I'm not a fan of. We're talking specifically in Kansas about language and math. There's a lot of flaws with what the Common Core does there. I personally don't have a problem if our state wants to get back out of the Common Core standards, which I think the House bill does just that. This Senate bill is nonsense, and the ramifications are so far-reaching and severe in scope. I mean, it's lunacy. You want to talk about the AP? Two of my best friends are AP U.S. history teachers. The AP test was just revised to be collapsed and shifted from just a recollection, or a large part of it, a recollection of events that happened, to synthesizing, thinking critically about those events, and being able to talk about that, analyze it, show that you fully understand what happened. Just this year, it's my understanding that the very first question on the practice AP test for U.S. history was about Benjamin Franklin, and talking about the achievements of Benjamin Franklin and what he did for this country. So this is just silly, I think. I don't know why this Senate bill is so far-reaching, but you talk about, I mean, colleges across the country will look at, depends on the college, number one, but number two, depends on your AP test score.
Yep.
We're talking about robbing students in Kansas from the ability to get college credit from the AP tests. Richard can talk more about how there's ramifications from this Senate version about dual credits with even state post-secondary institutions in Kansas. I mean, I don't get it. We have a state board of education who presumably has people on it who have some background with education. Let's leave the curriculum specifics to those folks, I think. And certainly when we get into the whole prosecutorial thing, we last time I was on the show, talked about it with Russell Fox from Friends, wedge issues. Mm-hmm. Who are they baiting? Why are they feeling the need to bait a particular group or wage war on teachers in order to win some political points? I don't get it.
Let's talk about the inappropriate material, because we need to kind of speed up here due to time. Another bill that was approved in the Senate basically strips the protection that teachers had over inappropriate material. And this is a slippery slope, I think, and this is based primarily on that whole poster situation that happened, I believe, in Northeast Kansas, which, again, I've said it before, say it again, actually proved that the system worked, because the poster was removed. The teacher was, I believe, disciplined, and everybody, I think, was fairly happy with the outcome of that. But now I guess we can throw them in jail, too.
Yes, no good deed goes unpunished. The situation here is we have an obscenity law that is based upon community standards. And there are two exemptions that are given for that. One, to medical doctors. In the office, you need to be able to explain and show posters that would be obscene if you were out on the street, but are certainly very critical and very important when you're dealing with a patient. And the same thing then for teachers when they're working in the classroom and the context of the classroom. There are things that a biology teacher and other teachers would use that would be quite appropriate because the teacher sets a context. So therefore, these materials are exempted from the obscenity law. It's a positive. You don't have to worry as a teacher if you're going to present male and female anatomy in a biology class about being prosecuted. Yep. That is being taken away, completely taken away. Now, some people that say that, well, it says in here if it's of scientific value or literary value, but otherwise you're going to get prosecuted, okay? And that then takes us to looking at actually what you are doing. Can you imagine if we take one side of the evolution or one side of the climate change and say, we're going to have prosecution here for various reasons unless you can prove it is scientific? Well, we've got some people that would say that's not scientific. And so therefore, schools are not going to come close to touching it. And a teacher won't, administrators, simply because of the potential risk that one person out there feels that what their child sat in. But there are opt-ins and opt-outs that are done at the local decision level with school boards. And this is part of sexuality education in Kansas. It's already written in there. There's not a need for this, and yet it has come back. This is the fourth time. 3 times we fought this and we get back down.
And Ed, the Democrats didn't even put up a fight on this one, which is...
Well, we don't know the full story there. It's not over again. There'll be a debate. What is discouraging to me is these folks talk small government, but this is expanding the authority of government, extending the authority of government to essentially do social engineering of a kind. It's their version of social order, and it's another one of these things looking for a problem to be solved.
Rodney, smaller government except when it comes to morality.
Oh, absolutely. Whatever their blind ideology is, and usually on the social conservative side. All I'll finish up by saying is this. We're not talking about a parent contacting a principal because they're concerned about something that was done and wanting to have a conversation. We're not talking about a parent going to their local school board official to talk about a concern about something they saw or their student came home and said happened in the classroom. We're talking about criminal prosecution of a teacher because maybe they read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Or maybe there was a poster because a government teacher talked about Lawrence v. Texas and about sodomy, or even the teacher just explained what sodomy is and it hurt somebody's little ears. This is completely ridiculous. And you talk about a chilling effect. I don't throw that phrase around much. This would be a terrifyingly huge chilling effect.
And this is a Mary Pilcher Cook.
Of course it is.
Bill. Yeah. So there we go. We will take another commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about local elections and the potential for them to move. We'll be back in 2.5 minutes.
Conquer the elements with one of the most advanced all-wheel drive systems ever made. Mercedes-Benz latest generation of superior stability, power, and control. 4MATIC, now on more Mercedes-Benz models than ever before. See your authorized Mercedes-Benz dealer for exceptional offers through Mercedes-Benz Financial Services.
Hey ladies, couldn't you really use a fun day? You know, shopping, good food, maybe even get the diva treatment, all for a good cause. Get it all at the 10th Annual Shopportunity, an event especially for women, Thursday, April 23rd at Newmarket Square. You can even upgrade to the Diva Club for some extra special treatment. Best of all, Shopportunity benefits people with disabilities through Independent Living Resource Center. Call or visit cake.com to get your advance tickets before they're gone.
Shopportunity, together with these sponsors and Cakeland.
Your website is a direct reflection of your business. Create a dynamic and responsive website with the power of LocalX. LocalX is a full-service, national quality-level digital agency dedicated to local business. Together, we will maximize the growth of your organization in your community. Contact a local expert and get started today. LocalX, your local digital marketing experts. Go online at localxmarketing.com.
Why do you want Walmart's new unlimited plan, now with 4G LTE for just $29.88 a month?
Honey, we got unlimited internet. Look at that. What should we do?
I mean, we could pin, post, tweet, snap, tag, check, and share. Oh.
Why don't you do whatever you just said on your own phone?
Because you need to do more without paying more. Get connected with Walmart Family Mobile's new unlimited plan, now with 4G LTE for just $29.88 a month. Online and in-store. Save money, live better. Walmart.
Ryan Phillippe.
If you think I did it, arrest me.
Juliette Lewis.
That's what I'm gonna find out.
I didn't kill him! Secrets and Lies, tonight, 9/8 Central on ABC.
Wins for Kansas, awarding $500 grants to deserving nonprofits in our community.
Do you know an organization that's had a positive impact on you or someone you know?
We'll make a donation to a different nonprofit organization every week.
And welcome back. Another bill that's, I think, pretty interesting would move local elections from the spring to the fall. And this is something that Mayor Brewer here in the city of Wichita spoke about during his State of the City address and was adamantly opposed to it. It's an interesting concept, and supporters say that it would actually increase turnout. Of course, those in opposition say it would make local elections more partisan and that sort of thing.
I think Ed's going to probably disagree with me, at least a little bit. I haven't seen I didn't look to see what the actual legislation that was passed today that does this. To me, as long as it's nonpartisan and it's moved to the fall in odd number years, the biggest reason why I think this is going to increase voter turnout is, what are we expecting? This show's filmed on Thursday. What are we expecting come Saturday morning?
Snow.
A lot of snow.
Yeah.
What happens next Tuesday?
An election.
A primary election. Who's going to be out pounding the pavement? Maybe some serious, I mean, there might be some diehard campaigners
if you
out
want
there.
it enough, you will.
God love them, yeah. I mean, when you talk about this spring election going from November to March and the weather and the lack of daylight, it just, to me, is common sense that putting these elections to where you have the summer and the fall months to be out engaging with voters and constituents, that, of course, you're going to see, and even if you don't see just a huge voter turnout, at least the engagement is better than it is in the spring.
But, you know, one lawmaker, and Ed, I'll get your comment on this one, has already gone on record as saying that this would actually take some of the power away from the teachers' unions, because this lawmaker thinks that they get out the vote in the spring more so than they could in the fall when everything else is going on. I don't know how accurate that is.
I don't think there's a lot of evidence that teachers are active voters, to be honest.
Well, this last election, I think, would show that they really aren't.
Yeah. Most of the research says it doesn't make much difference when you hold them. I think Rodney's point's a good one. At least just in Kansas, the time of the year, the seasons would seem to get folks more engaged in the fall. I know cities and schools are opposing this, and I think most of the opposition wrapped around making them partisan, which I would not support. I don't think that's a good idea. Most folks in city and county government, certainly schools, would say the issues we have are not partisan issues for the most part. So I think if they do it in off-year elections, it's not made partisan, I don't think it's as big an issue.
Richard, I chuckled when I read that quote, and I can't remember what lawmaker it was that made the statement, but you know, my initial reaction was, didn't really matter. I mean, if the teachers really got out to vote, I mean, they were trying to get them whipped into a frenzy with Governor Brown back, and didn't really seem to have any impact.
And actually using the NEA or teachers unions in general in Kansas as a whipping boy, this may be the case in other states where they are powerful and they have the right to strike, but here as an essential service, teachers do not. Right. And therefore, to say that they are this is going to get me in good trouble with Kansas NEA, but they are nowhere near as dominant a force in Kansas politics by far.
Well, there you go. Let's take another commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about liquor sales in grocery stores and what that might mean. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
It's Customer Appreciation Month here at Jabara's Flooring Superstore. Our customers appreciate our low prices and huge selection, and we appreciate our customers. This month, you'll find special bargains throughout the store. Come in and browse the flooring specials: carpet, wood, laminate, and tile. Discounts and special prices in all departments during our Customer Appreciation Month. This is the perfect time to get your new flooring. So come see us today at Jabara's Flooring Superstore on North Broadway.
I had a 2008 Hyundai.
We went around the country talking to people who made the switch to Ford.
Chris likes to look sharp. The Focus is so much more attractive than every other vehicle in its class. I worked 35 miles from here. I needed something that was fuel efficient. It's my new toy. I like the sync. I have over 8,000 songs.
I'm not allowed to eat in it, drink in it. He absolutely loves it.
Now get up to $51.90 total savings or 0% financing for 72 months, plus up to $11.90 total savings. Or lease a Focus for just $135 a month.
We expose the scams.
Guess what? That check, it's going to bounce.
We hold the cheaters accountable.
We won't tolerate people here that don't want to obey the rules.
We follow the turns of every story.
Wherever smart meters are used, they have problems.
To uncover the secrets just beneath the surface.
A huge reason for it going up is greed.
And make the wrongs right.
To a recommendation that the administrator's license be suspended or revoked.
The Cake News I-Team. Always tracking, always alerting, always protecting.
Hi, I'm Alan Smith. You may recognize me from my television show where we focus on gardening and ways to live a happier, healthier lifestyle. I hope you'll come see me in person at the Outdoor Living and Landscape Show, where I can teach you some techniques that are simple as learning the right plant in the right place. I look forward to seeing you at the Outdoor Living and Landscape Show, Saturday, March the 7th.
And welcome back. Should hard liquor be sold in grocery stores? That is the issue. And, you know, I think this is actually, we've seen this past 2 sessions, I believe, maybe more even. A group, Uncork Kansas, wanted to allow liquor sales in grocery stores, and there's some other groups that have been working on both sides. And of course, the small mom and pop liquor store owners are worried that this will drive them out of business, and it may very well.
Sure. And there's lots of debate on both sides, good debate to be had. I'm stuck in the middle because while in principle I think it's a good idea, there is some flaws with the legislation. I don't know why they're capping it to say, well, we're going to take the current existing number of licenses and just reshuffle those, and so the big box stores, the Dillons or whatever, have to buy out other people's licenses. That doesn't make sense to me. You know, if you talk to someone who's, you know, liberty-minded, we talk about leveling the playing field. And again, the debates on both sides on how or does the legislation actually level the playing field, is the status quo level. You know, under Kansas law right now, a person cannot own more than one liquor license. They can't own more than one liquor store. So part of that maybe had to be changed so Dillons can do this. And this is bad on me for not going and actually parsing through the legislation. But if that's the case, then I or someone else should also be able to own multiple liquor stores so that I too can leverage buying in bulk just like Dillons does. So is the legislation perfect? I don't think so. Should it be passed? I was a big fan initially and not so much of a fan now, not on principle, but rather on the practicality to make sure that this is as level of a playing field as possible.
And Ed, I think that's the primary argument from the small liquor store owners. You know, they worry that this will run them out of business because, exactly as Rodney said, the ability to buy in bulk with these big stores, they've got one little store and they just can't compete.
Well, they can't. I have a cousin who has a liquor store, so I've got to be careful of what I say here. Think of where we've been, you know, with the issue of intoxicating liquors. I mean, we banned them. First state in the union that constitutionally banned them, and it's been a long evolution. We're going to go to the free market, and they're trying to work out the details of how we do it. As I understand it, each Dillon store would have to have its own license, so they'd have to acquire from these. And I think this kind of crazy buy a license from an existing store is some way to compensate these small store owners.
Well, and I read about that, and that one kind of struck me because the point was, well, when that small liquor store owner retired, they could sell that license. Is that open to the highest bidder then? Is it something like you can just set whatever price you want?
Well, I don't think they're going to set any prices. I think it's what the market will bear. And
that throws a whole new...
But presumably you could buy a license out in Gove County and use it here in Wichita. So again, it's a way to get to a freer market in booze, which we've had a long struggle with in our great state of Kansas.
Well, it wasn't just too many years ago when you couldn't buy alcohol on a Sunday,
right?
And you know that has changed, and I suppose the times they are changing here in the state of Kansas. Richard,
you have to keep in mind that what underlies this, as you look at the history, which is very important. Also, you can see in all of these other laws that we've been discussing, though, some of the conservative and the belief perspective that society is running away, some bad things are happening, and we have to put some controls on how fast we're going to change. And that certainly it shows in this law, but it also helps explain some of the actions that are being taken in some of the other laws that we don't quite understand sometimes where they're coming from.
All right.
It's a history.
One more topic I wanted to just touch upon in this segment, and that's deals with marijuana penalties. We've spoken about this a little bit on the show in the past, because here in the Wichita area, there was a group that was trying to pass a petition a year ago to legalize marijuana, I believe, more recently to decrease the penalties for marijuana possession. And now we're seeing this potentially at a state level as well, but it looks like that may be derailed, at least temporarily. I don't know. I don't think any action's being taken right now. It's being postponed a bit.
From what I understand, it was referred back to committee, so the committee would have until tomorrow to get it out of committee, and if they don't, it dies.
Yeah, it's turnaround.
Right.
And we tape on Thursday, so we just want to remind people that tomorrow's Friday, and that's it for the session as far as bills.
Getting
new
it out
bills.
of committee.
Yeah. And of course, the lawmakers can still continue to work on the budget, which, I'm sure they're busy with their pencils right now. But yeah, this one, I think, I just don't see anything happening with this session. I could be wrong. Ed, any thoughts?
Well, I mentioned a few weeks ago that Charles Koch, one of our local folk here, has weighed in on decriminalizing a variety of things, and I don't know that he's weighed in on this specifically, but this would certainly be one of the kinds of things. And I think that's what's going on at state level. They're kind of saying, what are the penalties we've had really realistic today, with all the change that's going on nationally and next door.
Well, and Richard, I think that's a real concern with the fact that it is legal in one of our neighboring states. So what do you do with those people that are driving across the border that may have purchased something legally in one state, but then they get in Kansas and get pulled over for having a broken out taillight or whatever?
Legal at the state level in Colorado, not at the federal level, but the feds will back off for now. And what we're having to look at, is this really going to be sweeping the nation, and for what reasons? And it seems the rationale has as much to do with taking away the criminality of it rather than addressing actually the effects of it. And so if you're looking at it from a moral perspective, I don't know. Kansas may be the last state if it did sweep the nation. But keep in mind that Washington, D.C. was proposed to go all the way, and they didn't. They did go ahead and allow possession, but they did not allow public selling. And so and Kansas is not Washington, D.C. in any way.
Or Colorado.
Or Colorado. So is it sweeping and going to become more common as gay rights has seemed to be in the court? Have to wait and see.
Somebody made a comment on the show a few weeks ago, and I wish I remembered who said this, because I would give them credit, because I thought it was an astute comment. Not that there aren't a bunch, but this one was pretty good. And the comment was about these marijuana penalties and the fact that the petitions were being started. May not happen this year, may not happen next year, but it's the start of change. And whether you like it or not, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it is the start of change that I think inevitably will happen to some degree here in this state.
That was Russell Fox.
Okay, well, there we go. We'll give Russell some credit.
Absolutely.
Thanks for remembering that. All right, let's take another commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about HB 2234. I just can't let this one go. I will soon, but one more show. We'll be back.
You have pretty hands.
Thank you. I was going to say the same about you.
I used to play piano,
I know.
By the way, I understand you've fallen in love. Congratulations.
Who told you that?
The American Way, dedicated to helping others with a non-credit nursing assistant course that you can complete in just a few weeks.
Is he rich? Handsome?
He has a good heart, Ellen. Just like you.
Find us at national.edu.
When it comes to the safety of your family, who do you trust? Protection Shelters provides quality, affordable, safe shelters to ride out unpredictable Kansas storms, business, community, or home installations. Call Protection Shelters today. Your safety and peace of mind is our priority.
Wouldn't it be nice if someone made mom's life easier? Someone on call when the kids got sick. Someone with the perfect dinner idea. A team of fellow dog walkers, potty trainers, and tantrum tamers. Someone who listens, who understands, who lends a hand. Wouldn't it be nice if moms didn't have to do it all on their own? At Moms Every Day, we're making mom's life easier.
The Blarney Breakfast, Wichita's favorite St. Patrick's Day tradition, turns 40 Tuesday, March 17th at Old Chicago East. Enjoy a great breakfast and help build a pot of gold for the children of Rainbows United. It's $12 for adults and $5 for the wee kids. Proceeds help special needs children and their families served through Rainbows United. Cakeland cares with the 40th annual Blarney Breakfast. Please join us along with our partners in helping Kansas kids.
Join us for a journey into the most extreme weather in America, from catastrophic snowfall to deadly tornadoes and hurricanes.
We'll explain the polar vortex, drought, wildfires, and mudslides.
Tonight at 10:35 on Cakeland.
And welcome back. I will apologize in advance. I just have to give this one more try, this show. HB 2234, which we've had a great deal of fun with over the past couple of weeks. And it was even more interesting. I was proud to say that the show, This Week in Kansas, was mentioned in testimony, I believe, on there in Topeka. And this all came about. Representative Seward from Pretty Prairie, who is one of the supporters of the bill, who didn't write the bill. Nobody knows who did, because whoever did apparently forgot. But he was his brother-in-law submitted some written testimony, I believe, in favor of this bill, and said that he'd watched the show and that got him fired up because he thought we looked like a bad comedy sketch. So some days I will admit that's probably pretty true.
Saturday Night Live or something like that.
I think that's, yes, I think so.
Which my wife rejects because she says I'm not funny. But so I'm going to attempt to be funny here. You know, HB 2234, you keep saying like that, it's going to start sounding like a virus. You know, we designate those viral infections that way. On a more serious note, what I'll just say quickly is, if you're a student of history or political science, you know of the warning Lord Acton gave regarding government, where he said that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yep. I don't think there's a better descriptor, just based on what we've talked about on this show tonight, of what's going on in Topeka right now. They are so blindly, ideologically motivated to, whether you go with Ed's social engineering or to remake Kansas and what they think Representative Scott Schwab from Olathe says they were sent to do by their constituents. They don't care. I don't think they care. I think that they think they've got a mandate, and so they're going to do whatever their brand of social conservatism or radicalism, whatever you want to call it, tells them to do that day. Thus, you get something like HB 2234 and some of the other stinkers that we've been talking about on the show.
Well, we talked about the cowardice of the bill last week.
Right.
The fact that whoever wrote it won't own up to it. And, you know, I'll say it again this week. You know, if you're not going to own up to writing the bill, then
well, some folks may not know what this HB 234 is. I mean, rather than some disease. That's a good point, Ed, because
it's
actually a bill that would not allow the distinguished professor on my right or me to use our title as a professor in any column or opinion piece that we would write. When I first saw it, and I talked loosely to the press about it, I asked if it was the Kansas version of the Sedition Act, that any activity that, you know, creates turmoil among the people should be banished in some way. And I don't think this is going to go anywhere. But it does show the kind of motivation that is there. And the idea that we're going to, again, expand the power of government to control individual liberty. And that's what's going on.
You know, Richard, from a television news department or a newspaper's standpoint, and I'm not saying we're journalists here in This Week in Kansas. In fact, I tell people that we are not all the time. This is an opinion show. This is not the news that you're watching. So those emails that get sent to me that, you know, this is horrible journalism, you're right, it is horrible journalism. That's not what we try to be. We do try to give you a snapshot of what's going on in the state of Kansas, but we also tell you our thoughts and our opinions about it, and so it's different from journalism. But the reason why you guys are identified is because it shows that you have some type of expertise in the field that we're talking about generally. It's just like if I'm talking about aviation, I might have an aviation expert on the show, and we do that from time to time. Richard, I haven't given you much time. We've got about 30 seconds left in the show. Make a point and we'll get out of here.
I really appreciate it because I do both newspaper columns and radio and TV. And for the first time, I said, go ahead and tag me because we're talking about sex education, and I train biology teachers, and I know the laws and requirements and what affects them. And so therefore, my tagline should go on. If it comes to political areas, candidates, then I shouldn't be endorsing them. And we already have those laws already on the book.
All right. Guys, thank you very much for being on the program again, and thank you for watching the show. If you have any emails or comments, text, or send me an email. I'm rattled by this. This Week in Kansas at cake.com. We appreciate you watching the show. Hope you have a wonderful week.
Join Menards this week in saluting our